Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all having a great day. I wanted to talk about this topic, and I've talked about it before, and so I want to be clear. I'll say this again right off the hop. This is not meant to blame or shame people. And this is not meant to just, be pointing fingers. And so when we talk about our childhood, and things that might have happened in our formative years, and when we try to reconcile that as adults, I think it's quite natural that people will sort of, brush off or try to make excuses for things, or try to, integrate their experience in a way that is manageable, because sometimes it can be really painful to acknowledge that certain things were maybe missing from your experience growing up in your household, or maybe there was things that were really deeply hurtful in your growing up environment by your caregivers, right? And so it's really hard to reconcile that in order to manage and to survive, we often will put aside our own authenticity and put attachment first as a survival technique, right? So in order for us to do that, we need to find a way to justify maybe their actions or inactions as parents or caregivers, right? And as an adult, if you've done some level of healing, you might have come to a place of understanding where they were at that point in their lives and why they were behaving and acting in the ways that they were. And you can maybe find some ways to understand that, and it can help you to recognize that it wasn't your fault. I think a lot easier when you can get to that place. Or at least that's what it took for me, right? To recognize that as a parent, we're often all just doing the best that we can at this time. And I say that for myself as well, right? And it would be, in a perfect world, you would have worked through some of your developmental trauma and kind of gotten back to your authentic self and being able to live in your authenticity in early adulthood, because then that would perfectly sort of set you up for attracting the right kind of people into your life to help you create and build the life that you want to build. But what often happens is that we go into adulthood not recognizing that there's some work that we might need to do, right? Because when I started my deep dive into developmental trauma, it was actually through sort of Dr. Gabor Mate's work, right? And a lot of his talks. And he would often talk about how when he speaks in front of an audience and asks people to raise their hands if they had a great, good childhood. And most people would raise their hands. And then, then he would ask, how many of you have been in to see a specialist, like a doctor of like cardiology or rheumatology, or any of the ologies and ists and whatnot, and a good majority of them would raise their hands. And then sometimes, depending on who he was speaking to, it'd be like, well, who here would admit to having an addiction to something that's maybe not, that we know is not healthy, right? And so, like, just in asking those questions, you start to get a better sense of, well, wait a second now, like, when we start to put these things together, we need to recognize just how important those years are, and to well, for a lot of those years, we're not capable, because we haven't grown, our brain hasn't grown, we haven't gone through the different developmental stages of, growth, and so we don't necessarily have a language for how we're feeling in those moments, and especially the first, probably 6 years, right? It's very much a felt sense. We experience our world through our bodies, and it's very much an emotional state, and it's very reactive, and right. So thinking about how people describe 2-year-olds and their their reactions to things in their environment when things don't go their way, or how they expected it to, or if they're scared, or those are all natural reactions to their environment given the developmental stage that they're in. And yet we've sort of made that out to be the terrible 2s and whatnot, and the horrible 3s, and all of those things, right? Like, so we've kind of negated, we've created some negative languaging around a lot of what's natural behavior for the developmental states that they're in. And maybe if we could get better at allowing kids to be in that natural developmental stage, and support them and let them know that this is natural. It's okay to cry because that happened. It's okay to feel that way. Yes, it makes total sense that you would feel that sense of loss because your ice cream just, landed on the ground, right? Of course, that's devastating to you in this moment, right? Because it is, and we should acknowledge that. And so a lot of people don't grow up with that kind of validation, right? Validating a child's lived experience and saying, yeah, that happened, and it's natural that you would feel that way, because anyone would feel that way, right? Like, to validate their experience, or to recognize where they are developmentally. So if we're lacking in that, or if there's actually real, abuse happening, then we need to acknowledge the damage that does. And yet so many people get into adulthood and they negate their own experience. They try to brush it off like it's no big deal, and they might point to successes that they've had in life and be like, see, I overcame that, I'm doing this now, and I'm doing so well. And and that can be true, and it is true, but they're also probably needing to still acknowledge and work through what was done to them or not done for them in their childhood. And I think that's a really hard thing to do, especially if you're still trying to maintain a relationship with your parents. And I think that in order to have a healthy relationship with our parents, we need to do that kind of work ourselves, whether they do it or not. And maybe what will come out of it is some healthy boundaries, and also just some more compassion and understanding of why they're the way that they are. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to continue to be in a relationship with them, or allow them to have any kind of toxic influence in your life. So I'm not suggesting that, but it can allow you to at least know what kind of distance that you need to have, or what kind of boundaries you need to have in place. If we don't acknowledge the fact that most people did not grow up in an environment that met all of their needs, and that there's likely some things that are still kind of lingering in our subconscious and needing to be sort of brought to the forefront. So I think there's a lot of people that are sort of in that space, and so they're not recognizing that their feelings of sadness or grief or anxiousness and just overwhelm often comes from a sense of some unmet needs, right? And so, and it'll start to create a pattern in your life and in your relationship that as you get older, you'll start, if you have the ability to, and if there's some safety created in an environment that will allow you to sort of look back and really tune into how your childhood made you feel. Not specific things that happened, because we won't always remember them, because people think that memory is, that you're able to sort of look back through your memory like you're looking back through slides or like you're watching a movie, and it doesn't always work that way. So some people don't actually see in their mind when they close their eyes or whatever, they're not actually picturing things in their mind. I know it took me a while to realize that, and to kind of wrap my head around that. But we can often learn about ourselves and our experiences by tapping into our body, or to even just recognize the patterns that keep showing up in our life. And that's often done in the subconscious mind. So getting therapies, getting into see people who can help you really work on that kind of level can be really deeply healing. So hypnosis, EDMR, EMDR, yeah, I don't know, whatever. Whichever way that is, that sort of thing, or somatic type therapies can really be helpful in helping you get in touch with what you are holding on to that you couldn't put words to then, and maybe still are struggling to put words to now, but you're ready to stop carrying those feelings with you in that way, right? So integrating those things and finding a way to gain that understanding about yourself can be deeply healing. And so if that's something that you would like to explore, then please feel free to reach out to me. You can reach out by private message. You can email me at stephsuggestion, 4 you@gmail.com, suggestion for you @gmail.com. And yeah, I'd love to hear from you, and feel free to comment below if you like, if you feel comfortable sharing your thoughts on if anything that I've said resonates. Does it sound like that maybe that's something that you need to explore in your own life, and maybe you're just wondering how to get started? Feel free to reach out. And thank you for joining me. Namaste.